how do you ensure communities own the value that they generate online? Because this is a trend that we have seen specialize over the last several years, and it just gets stronger and stronger. Where the walled garden effect is very high. So once you're on Instagram, once you have a following on Instagram, like that's all you have, right? It becomes like very hard to port anything over. So what we were interested in was like, how do we make sure that communities become platform independent, and also make sure that the value is captured.
Layer1 is a podcast and community dedicated to helping you master all things crypto. We'll be bringing you the best interviews with project executives, technical analysis for trading of the most popular cryptocurrencies, and insight into what's actually happening behind the scenes.
As you join us each episode, you're going to hear about tokens, fundraisers, investments, and even crypto conspiracies. But please remember that nothing we say should be considered financial or legal advice.
Come join us on this journey, and welcome to Layer1.
Good morning, good evening, good night. It's another episode of Layer1. Interesting episode we have here. Dimitri had some construction going on nearby, so he wasn't able to get on this episode. I got some questions for him. So this is going to be the first ever Layer1 interview where it's just one-on-one. So I have Sid Kalla here. Sid, how do you feel being the first ever one-on-one interview in Layer1?
I feel extra special, man. Let's get to it.
Cool, man. Cool. So we have Sid Kalla here, like I said, co-founder of Roll. We've had a ton of different people on the podcast that are associated with the social currency sector. We had Alex Masmej come on and talk about his Alex token. We've seen a bunch of social currency tokens kind of evolve over the last 6 months. So we needed to have the guys from Roll on. So I'm glad we finally got you. Sid, the first thing we do on Layer1 is talk about your background and kind of how you got into crypto and Bitcoin and found yourself in the Ethereum ecosystem.
Yeah, so super high level, like my background comes from the technical space. As I was a software developer. I actually started my career at Bloomberg as a software developer. And it was very close to the financial industry, like back then as well. And so once I kind of a mix of tech and finance, it's a kind of similar story as everyone else. Really, like once you discover Bitcoin, like back in the day, it's like now you're not sleeping for 3 days straight, just thinking about everything. That was kind of the same thing with me too. And then I kind of jumped in, was a researcher in the space for a long time as well. And like when Ethereum came out, like a lot of things changed in terms of the kinds of experiments you could run, the kinds of innovation you see. That's kind of also like the origin of Roll. So my co-founder was a researcher at Coindesk as well. And this was back when the space was much, much smaller. There were like 5 of us. And so obviously we knew each other from our work. Then got together and, started Roll.
Yeah, doing my research pre-episode, I kind of saw that both of you, it's Bradley, I believe.
Bradley,
yep. Yeah, Bradley, the other co-founder, had worked at Coindesk. So, we had to put a question in there of kind of taking us behind the scenes at Coindesk and like what the everyday kind of process is there at Coindesk and in what timeline you kind of joined that publisher.
Yeah, so we were both pretty early. So it's funny, when we joined, there was like a small little room in WeWork close to Times Square.
Oh, really?
And that was it. And then I think like last year when we went back, and there's this gigantic room of like computers everywhere, like that. They've like expanded like crazy since we left. Yes, our experiences would probably be a little different. So I joined right after Coindesk got acquired by DCG. So they closed their London arm. Who's the original founder? Shakil Khan, I think. It was originally like a London company, and then then Pete took over as the editor, and he kind of just ran all the operations from New York. And same with like my co-founder as well. We first actually met like through a direct introduction with Pete, who's not at Coindesk anymore, but one of the smartest minds in the space, I would say.
I'll keep it at one. If you could tell me any like really interesting story that happened at Coindesk while you were there. If you can't say anything, we can move on to the next topic, but I'd love to try to pick your brain there.
I don't know, man. Like one interesting thing for me was like I moved to London for like a separate thing right around when Coindesk closed their London shop. So I kind of became the de facto, like, hey, I can cover anything I want in London. So that was like a fun little experiment. Again, like this was way back in the day. There were like 5 people in the company.
Amazing. So you and Bradley were at Coindesk. Was this just a situation where you guys were emailing back and forth saying, like, look at this growth in Ethereum and what can we do with Roll? How did Roll kind of find its genesis at, I guess, the offices of Coindesk or your emails with Bradley?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're both like researchers in the space, and what we really got interested in the idea, kind of back in the day, was like how can blockchain like really enable things that social things that are socially important, and some of the things that were bubbling up in the surface, but something that wasn't very obvious back in the day was like how do you ensure communities own the value that they generate online, because this is a trend that we have seen specialize over the last several years, and it just gets stronger and stronger, where the walled garden effect is very high. So once you're on Instagram, once you have a following on Instagram, like that's all you have, right? It becomes like very hard to port anything over. So what we were interested in was like how do we make sure that communities become platform independent, and also make sure that the value is captured. So the whole if you look at the whole social media landscape, the communities just generally aggregating online, that's a multi-trillion-dollar economy, right? Like your Facebooks and Instagrams and all of that combined is like a huge economy. But we think most of that value is captured at the platform layer, not as much as at the creator and community layer. So what we were very interested to do with Roll was like kind of give that value, at least partly, kind of like back to the communities, as opposed to the platforms on which the communities aggregate.
Yeah, it's amazing. We've had a lot of conversations with people that are very involved in NFTs. I know we were having kind of an NFT discussion before the episode as well, and NFTs kind of do the same thing with game assets. So, kind of break down like what social currency is then, because we've talked with so many people. I feel like people have a vague understanding of what maybe social currency is. I think it is kind of a weird concept. It's very fringe, even within the cryptocurrency space. So from the horse's mouth at where you're creating social currencies, what is social currency?
Yeah, so you can think of that really as like branded ERC20 tokens. So the ultimate ownership, the ultimate relationship between, let's say, the creators and their communities, or within different community members, ultimately happens on the blockchain. So if I'm, we'll talk about this later, I guess, but you have like a Layer1 token, you're like sending it out to me, like that transaction again, like being recorded on the blockchain, right? So if tomorrow, like we have, we met over Zoom right now. But then, the same thing can happen on Twitter. The same thing can happen on like Twitch when you're live streaming somewhere. So it kind of like just crosses those barriers, right? Because ultimately the transaction is kind of recorded on the blockchain. So the ultimate relationship's kind of saved on the blockchain. So kind of becomes very platform agnostic. That's like a very like 20,000 feet level, but like to make it a reality, what we really need is the right infrastructure to make that happen. And that's where Roll kind of see. So again, like maybe like our thesis at a high level is you're seeing this user-generated content space, like the last decade or 2 decades, like really take off on the web. We think the next like generation-defining paradigm shift is going to be user-generated currency. And Roll's positioning itself in that world that we see coming, and we think like a lot of people don't. And we think like what that space really needs first is the infrastructure layer. So that's like, how do you integrate social money natively into Web3 apps, Web2 apps? Like, how are you seamlessly moving social money between your Instagram to Twitch to Twitter to Zoom to email to Ethereum ultimately? And that's kind of the layer that we are building right now. And we're already have some interest with application developers that are also interested to build on top of not just the protocol at the Web3 layer, but also from our Web2 layers. We're super excited about the next couple of years or so.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear about the growth as far as like from a user number perspective over the past 6 months and what you guys have seen there. Because I feel like over that time, we've seen kind of these sectors of NFTs and social currency kind of thrive. I don't know what the reasoning is, but I definitely want to get into those numbers with you. I kind of talked to you before the episode about a meetup that I had recently seen, and Yatsui, the founder I believe he's CEO of Animoca Brands, he was talking about all of these platforms, Facebook, Instagram, all these Web2 platforms kind of being seen as feudal kingdoms that aren't associated with each other. I think you just touched on it, right? Like if I have an Instagram, it doesn't necessarily benefit me to kind of share between Facebook and Instagram, or those kind of platforms are at odds with one another. They're not going to share information. They're not going to share assets between these two platforms. So they oftentimes become these segregated systems. So how does social currency unlock this? So take me through like one user perspective, from like a content creator's perspective. I have a token that I can create a community on Facebook as well as Instagram and have this one token between them, correct?
Yeah, so it's much more than that, right? Like again, if you, I guess back to the philosophical question that you were asking about, like these kind of these little fiefdoms, I guess. The ideal world, like again, we are not solving the whole piece of the puzzle. We are only solving the value part of the puzzle. But your ideal world would probably be something like all of the content, all of the, ultimately Facebook is a big database, right? Like of all your likes, all your posts, all your friends. It's a gigantic database. That's very high level how to think about it, right? But the underlying data layer and the application layer are intertwined. Like Facebook, as like Facebook.com, for example, is the only application that has access to your friend graph on Facebook. Again, like in an ideal world, what you probably want to do is like that data is like owned by either you or everyone. So it's kind of like a shared common public good. And then everyone can build applications on top of that, right? And then you can create your own filter moderation. So let's say you want an algorithm that wants to show you more of news. So you can go to like say facebooknews.com. But there's another algorithm that prioritizes your friends posts and status updates. So you should be able to go to like, let's say facebookfriends.com. They're ultimately looking at the same source of data, but the curation model is different. That would be like a nice kind of ideal social media platform, right? But again, like we're not solving the data part. So what we are more interested, because we also think that's a very long-term goal. We think it'll happen in 20 years. I'm not sure. I'm actually very happy to be wrong. But I don't see that happening in the next 5 years. But what we are able to do is kind of decentralize that value layer that you have. So if you have a community on Facebook, and let's say Facebook as a platform is valuable to you, you can actually use social money to convert. Let's say like a simple example being you have a Facebook page, but now you have created a new newsletter and you want your Facebook group to convert to your email newsletter because email is something that you own as opposed to a platform own, right? It's one of the open protocols. So one like super small example is like you are gonna reward everyone with 100 Layer1 tokens who migrate over from your Facebook group to your, let's say, your newsletter. So that's like one way you make communities liquid between platforms.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I wanted to have Dimitri on this call is because he always approaches the regulation standpoint. And obviously, if there's being a publicly traded token here, we have to ask the regulation problem. How do you go about kind of this situation of saying we're going to issue or we're going to have you mint these tokens on our platform and they're publicly traded on some decentralized exchange? How do you approach the regulation from that standpoint?
Yeah, so trading is not the I guess the only or the primary concern for, I'm guessing you're talking about like from like a securities perspective, especially in the US. So social money kind of the way we see that falls very squarely in the rewards category. So that's your like your loyalty points, your reward points, kind of similar to like your airline miles. Because one of the things you always have with social money, it wasn't exactly true, let's say during like the peak of 2017 manias. Was that there's always utility on roll and elsewhere. So if you go to like roll, app.roll.com right now, and you look at like any of the rewards, you have like Alex on the platform. We talked briefly about like Connie Digital's Hue. So if you go to like app.roll.com/reward/Hue, you will actually see all of the things that you can purchase with Hue, for example. So in that sense, it's like a very like a reward-based currency, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Okay. So you mentioned Alex there. Let's talk about some success stories that you've had on Roll. One of the interesting things I got from your, I believe you guys were on the Flippening podcast recently, and you guys talked about how one of the first people who minted their own personal tokens on Roll actually isn't a crypto user at all. So kind of a cool story there if you could go into it, but also lay out some success stories that maybe have sprung up on Roll, but also touch on maybe some missteps that you guys made along the way that you kind of would go back and say, maybe we should do it different.
Yeah. So yeah, that's funny though. Actually, the first person who ever issued her own social money on Roll was Laurel, and she's an Instagram influencer. She's in the beauty and ASMR space. If you're familiar with it, it's like people whispering in their microphones, kind of giving you a tingling sensation in your spine. Like that's her world, right? Like that has nothing remotely to do with crypto, and she's never held Bitcoin or Ethereum in her life. But the super cool thing is like someone like Laurel, who's young and a creator, and who has like several hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and TikTok, kind of intuitively understands that when she creates a community on like an Instagram or TikTok, that's not technically her community. Like you can just lose access tomorrow. When you do something with Tingles or your own social money, like that's hers to own. So it was, I mean, everything is a challenge, right? Like once you're on like a new platform. But what was like very interesting for us to see was there are like thousands of creators like Laurel who we believe like will see the value of social money over the next 1 to 2 years. Yeah, I guess. Sorry, again, back to your question of success stories. I think you were asking about. So when we think about stories, like for us on Roll, we kind of have archetypes in each category, right? Where we go. So I know like you're very much into NFT. So a huge success category for us is like NFT art. So this kind of started off with Connie Digital, who's a very like OG crypto artist, like a very early adopter of a lot of technologies, crypto and elsewhere. But once he showed up and like really started using Hue, which was his own social money, I think we're probably at like 80 plus like just digital artists right now, like crypto artists on the platform. So we kind of think like that's like a very people use this every single day, like any NFT artist. And we also like capped it off with I guess the whale token, if you're familiar with that. He's one of the largest like NFT collectors.
Man, I got a bad taste in my mouth from Whale because I was part of that whole Whale token drop. I did everything he asked for within the Discord when he was doing that launch. There was like an action that you needed to complete, and I didn't get my Whale tokens. Nothing against my man over there,
You should
but
DM him.
yeah, I did. I didn't really follow up. It wasn't too much of an airdrop, so I'm not too concerned. But I really liked the way that he branded and marketed what he's doing over at Whale. So is there like kind of a white glove process where you guys are like, hey, this is what you need to do? Does someone just approach you, or is it all handled kind of without any type of customer support?
No, so actually it is very hands-on right now. And there's a reason for that. Like when Roll started, like there was no concept or idea of social money. So what we were very interested was like we had to build the right community and the right story and the narrative going forward. So we were very, very selective with who we decided to work with. This was true for like the first 100. So we're about like 160 issuers right now. And that's true like even now. Obviously, this is not very scalable, and we kind of understand that. We're going to productize a lot of the onboarding stuff. But right now, the process is super cumbersome. Like you actually have to fill out a type form on our website. Kind of like we just ask you questions like, hey, how big is your community? Like, how do you plan to use social money, distributions? What can you offer in your social money and all that? And Bradley or I are pretty much like know everyone on, who's issuing right now. So we kind of audit your online presence, like what you're doing and all that, and only then kind of ultimately mint. So our backlog is way larger than how many we have minted so far.
Yeah, I'm interested in kind of the technical process of minting because in the research that we did, like pre-episode, we saw that essentially every person who's going through this process is getting the same amount of tokens. I didn't realize that. I thought it was very customizable. If I wanted to mint 10 tokens total, I could mint 10 tokens, but it looks like there's actually a set supply towards everyone. I think it's like 10 million tokens total. There's a vesting period and all these different things that you get. So can you break down the technical process of actually, okay, you've made it past the audit, you're ready to kind of mint your own tokens. What is the situation there with that process?
Yeah, that's a very good observation. And it is something that we made a decision early on because one problem that we saw was like, hey, you can tokenize everything. And that's great, but the mental bandwidth required to understand something like that is extremely vast. So when we standardize the economics, what really happens is we're able to get the network effects be much stronger. So here's like an example of something that we've seen time and time again. So take like the crypto art example. So Connie is the first crypto artist who issued Hue on our platform. He's minted Hue, and initially it's a huge learning process. Like, what is Hue? What is social money? What are you doing? Like, what is this thing? It's like the token. It's what ERC what again? And there's all of that learning process, right? But then what we saw was there are like 10, 20 people who like very regularly engage. Like they're everywhere getting Hue and gaining Hue, right? And guess what happens? Like out of those 10, 20 people, like 5 of them approached us and said like, hey, this is super interesting. Like we want to do this as well. And if you set like different economic parameters for them, then they have to do the whole education process all over again. But now what happens is they already know, like if I tell you like, hey, this is one Hue versus one, let's say Skull, which is another crypto artist from Skinny, you know exactly what you're getting, right? Like both of them have 10 million supply, both of them are vested over a period of about 3 years. Both of them have an initial issuance of about 2 million, and you can just go from there. So that really reduces the cognitive load, let's say, like required to understand what social money is.
I imagine they have a ton of other questions that go along with, creating their own token. I wonder if there's not like a huge Discord somewhere, a huge Telegram group where everyone that's created and minted personal tokens could interact and answer the questions that you already have. Because it seems like it's a little bit centralized with you guys having all like the answers about the minting process and all the questions that follow afterwards.
Yeah, we try to make it as simple as possible. So we have a Discord where people regularly hang out, and they can ask us any questions. And like I said, like we also know all of the issuers on Roll, so they're always free to just ping us on Twitter, Discord, just email, whatever. We are pretty responsive.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I promise not to hit you with too many more technical questions. I don't. Maybe you like that. Maybe you don't. But I had one more technical question for you. I actually wanted to know from like a user perspective, are the transactions all on chain? Because that was kind of one of the things that we looked at early in the research process, where you're kind of connecting these users that might not be associated with crypto. Do they have to set up a MetaMask wallet? I'm sure that there possibly is like a Roll wallet. So what actually is the process here, and how do you deal with the friction that comes with maybe building on top of Ethereum protocol?
Yeah, that's actually a very important question, we think, like, because we see social money as like a real tool to onboard the next 100 million people to crypto. And we like genuinely believe that. I know there are lots of efforts around like, hey, can gaming be the next, thing that brings in like 100 million people, right? Like that's also like a strong contender. Like we think it's social money simply because you don't need anything new. Like these communities that issue social money and like are used already exist. Like we're not building community from scratch. Like if in many ways, right? So what we did want to do was, I guess like our philosophy broadly speaking when we approach this is that you never need to know about Ethereum or blockchain unless you want to. So when you sign up for the Roll app, it's as easy as signing up for like your like a PayPal account or like your Facebook account, right? Just like your email and email
No
username,
keys, nothing.
and like a password. Yeah, none of that stuff, right? Like we manage all that for you. But what you can do is you can always withdraw your social money to an Ethereum address. And we pay the gas there. You never have to, like do anything or kind of try to make transactions, right? So like we manage all that technical complexity. So let's say, for example, you want to use social money to buy some NFT on OpenSea. Then the way you would do that with Roll is you will just withdraw your social money to your MetaMask address from the Roll app. And then from your MetaMask, you just connect it directly to OpenSea. So that's a very deep thing too, and we can kind of talk about that, where it can go on an endless cycle. But basically, the vision of the world that we see is like there is a whole Web2 infrastructure, right? That's your companies like OpenSea, which are already doing very incredible with NFT assets. Those people can interact directly with Ethereum because that's what they do every day. But there's a whole other universe of Web2 companies as well. So these are everything from your social media type platforms to like very niche creator communities that we've seen online. And we're very regularly in talks with many of them and have some pretty strong leads. Those people have never touched crypto in their life. And there's no way they're gonna run your Ethereum node or use some APIs to manage keys and all of that stuff, right? So that's kind of where Roll as the infrastructure play comes in. So what they do is they'll just plug into the Roll APIs. So they own the entire user experience. So like, how do you onboard someone? How do you send someone? Like, maybe you click a button, it's like a like, but instead of a like, it's a tip. So maybe you can tip someone 0.1 of their social money, right? Like, so they want all these features, but obviously they don't want to come to the Roll app, right? Because that kind of breaks your experience. So our Roll APIs can power all those experiences.
Gotcha. What has been the feedback from some of your creators of Roll tokens, or the minting process of the Roll tokens? Have you had feedback from guys like Alex, guys like, I think Kerman is another one that's done a pretty popular personal token? Have they come back to you and said, hey, I need this feature, or hey, this feature doesn't really work for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're still in pretty early stages, and the funny thing is there are about 160 creators. I'm sure like every one of them has at least like one or two things that they would like to see, and there's no overlap, right? So which is why we believe in like the long tail of applications that we want to enable as well. But some interesting things that have come up with, so especially on the crypto native side, is things um, like access. So for example, let's say to access a Telegram channel or like a Discord channel, you need at least say 100 or 1,000 Alex to join. So we were actually like partnering with Abridged. So they built the first Telegram bot for that. And I think Alex started using that. We'll see more people using that as well. And there's also the concept of voting, which is very interesting. I think Abridged might build that. Some other teams might build that too. We're super excited about that. So kind of just the idea being like, hey, what does my community think? But you don't want to do a Twitter poll because anyone can say whatever they want on a Twitter poll. You kind of want the real stakeholders to kind of like tell you what they think is right. So you can weigh the votes by, or I guess like, yeah, weigh the overall things based on how much Alex you have and just know what your community thinks.
Gotcha. Yeah, we've been doing a ton of things within Layer1. I think we threw up some community polls at the beginning of June. We're doing a ton of different things to kind of have a engaged in lively community. So I wonder, maybe if it's not coming from me, but it's coming from you, pitch a Layer1 community member on maybe a Layer1 token. Just give me any type of utility that they could possibly use a Layer1 token for potentially in the future, maybe a month, a year down the line.
Yeah, we would love to do that actually, and see that being used in the wild. Yeah, so basically, when you're thinking about this tokens, I think you're primarily looking at it as like a community building and engagement tool. So there are two aspects to it, right? Like one is how do the users earn Layer1 tokens, and then the second thing is, once I have Layer1 tokens, well, what do I do with them? So on the earning side, it's super interesting. Is like you can almost think as a phase one for the token, you can almost think of it as what KPIs are important to you. Like perhaps it is that you want to curate questions from the community before an episode, right? Perhaps the thing that's important to you is people watch the video on YouTube, or maybe like watch it as soon as it comes out, because some people have said that based on like YouTube algorithms, you value like early viewers more than like late viewers, for example. Yeah, exactly. So perhaps that's important to you, or maybe you're trying to build a new like a Twitter following, like maybe that's important to you, or like a newsletter, right? Like you're kind of building a mailing list. So what you can really do with your Layer1 token is like you can supercharge any KPI that you want. So you're building a newsletter, you will say, hey, the first 100 people who sign up get 25 Layer1 tokens. Let's say like YouTube views are important to you. You put like a link in YouTube description. Kind of a role gives you like the ability for earn code, so you can just click on a link, and that's like a unique link, so people can't guess that. And the first 10 people to sign up will get like 100 Layer1 tokens. And after that, you kind of like stops, right? So you can do all of these kind of cool things, and people have been like super creative about that. What are some in the NFT space, like one I'll just throw in like one example. There are like 1,000 we can talk about now, but like one very cool thing we saw early on was people were building these art museums in VR on crypto voxels especially. Yeah, and one of the things that Connie really did, and now I think like many artists do, is they'll throw in like a small Easter egg somewhere in their gallery, so you have to find it, so it's not obvious to you. So it kind of like forces the users to actually view the gallery, kind of just going around. That also like was a very early onboarding experience for many crypto voxels users as well through social money.
Yeah, this is a pretty broad statement here, and I'm kind of jumping out, but I love that gamification idea, man, as it comes to the end user. And I really, I was listening to, again, the Flippening podcast, and your ideas on the end user are very similar to mine. So I definitely appreciate your mindset there of really highlighting and kind of like really just concentrating right on the user. It's all about the user, and it's all about the member of that community. So I appreciate your thoughts there. But I saw a tweet the other day, getting back to my original point, I saw a tweet the other day about Robinhood and how they've really gamified buying stocks, and they've seen it's really blown up. I mean, my father's on Robinhood buying oil ETFs, and I'm like, please stop. But anyways, it's this gamification model that kind of like gets users involved. So I think that's kind of what you were touching at, and I do appreciate that. So I had a couple other questions. I definitely want to get your broad takes on the market. I appreciate you shilling a layer one token here for me. I'm going to do that as well as we go on. But is there anything else kind of as far as role goes? Like, what features are you guys launching here over like maybe the next 6 months to a year?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Like I said, like we want to play, like we see this category as like incredibly massive in the next 10 to 20 years. So we want to position ourselves at the infrastructure layer because we think that's kind of what the space needs right now. So what we're really focused on is like two things, I would say, like over the next like 1 year, let's say. One is we do want to decentralize the protocol. So right now, all the decisions that are being made are made by, well, Bradley and me essentially. So that's like, as role as a company. We don't think that's like a long-term solution. So one thing we do want to try to do is kind of make a lot of that process decentralized on the Web3 layer. And that'll also provide a lot more benefits, we think, for like dApp developers who can build directly on our smart contracts then. And then the second thing we want to do is kind of just really build the infrastructure for the Web2 layer. And in this, like we think it's like two-pronged approach. Like one is, and people are already saying this about us, which is really nice to hear, but role as the PayPal of social money. So kind of this idea that you should be able to, with one line of code somewhere, like just be able to integrate social money payments and earning into your website, like your WordPress blog, your newsletter, whatever. So we'll probably like be building that. And then the second part of this is the social aspect of it. So, the PayPal kind of almost like sounds like the money aspect of it. But the social aspect, which we also want to build, is like think of like native bots that live on, like role bots that live on different social media platforms. So there's a role bot on Telegram, there's a role bot on Discord, Twitter, whatever other platform that comes out as well. And you can like, once you connect all these accounts to your role account, like you can seamlessly just move from like Twitter to Telegram to Discord to your PayPal checkout or to Ethereum or Uniswap, whatever else you want. So we just want to make that process very seamless. And what's super interesting is like different platforms are very different when it comes to, like you said, the end user gamification, let's say. So like a simple example is if you're a streamer, which we have about like 10, 20 streamers on the platform. One thing that's very important to you is how long people stay on the stream. So like the robot, what it can do. So one idea that we have, which we talked with our like user base, is basically think of a robot that just sits in your channel when you start the stream. And you give it an initial amount, let's say, 1,000 layer one tokens in your example, right? And whoever people come, people join, people leave the stream, and just a continuous thing, right? And at the end of the stream, it will distribute those 1,000 tokens based on how many hours you've spent on the stream. And then you can make like nuances on that, right? Let's say someone subscribed in the meantime, you get more. Someone donated something, you get even more, and so on.
It's interesting, man. We're talking NFTs. We haven't touched on DAOs, but all of the things that we're talking about with gamification and with kind of community engagement, these are the conversations that are happening within both the NFT space and the DAO space. So I wonder what your experience has been kind of meshing your way into the DAO space, if you have at all. I know Abridged actually is definitely in the DAO space heavily. Meta Cartel, these are the conversations I've had with Drew and not Peter, but I've heard him talk on meetups and things like that. Drew, Cooper, all these guys within the Meta Cartel are having kind of the same conversations we are. So what do you make of DAOs within kind of the social currency? I feel like they're a natural fit almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think there's a lot of synergies between like both approaches. Our approach has generally been like creating DAOs at like very large scale is very difficult because there's all sorts of issues with governance. Like who's responsible, like who's voting, who's not voting, and all of that. And it kind of goes without saying like we are very long-term bullish on DAOs. Not sure if like the current iterations are the best way forward. We've been in the crypto space for a long time, so these are not even new to Ethereum, right? Like we've had these discussions kind of since 2012, 2013. I haven't seen like a super compelling just like solution to that, but would love to see that. So our approach was again, like when we started the company and with what we want to start is like once you start with existing communities, especially communities that are centered around a person. Then the decision-making process becomes simple because you more or less follow the person whose token that is. Again, to begin with, like things do transform into like a true community currency. like going back to like your layer one solution, for example, if you were to have a vote that says, how many layer one tokens do you deserve to watch a YouTube video? And if you think that's like a 7-day process, like, nothing's going to get done. So more or less what we're going to do is like, hey, Q, like, what do you think is the right amount, based on everything that you know about, like your company and what's important to you. And people will respect that because, the community is kind of centered around you. So a lot of that process becomes simpler. But again, like that being said, like we actually have many experiments like bridges into DAOops, and that very seamlessly fits into like social money tooling as well. We've had some creators experiment with their social money, so they still issue and roll, but they kind of create a treasury for like a DAO-like system. So like Colony, for example, is like one popular thing that people have been trying to play around with. So you can create a treasury of, let's say you have 10 million, right? You can kind of put like 100,000 tokens in a community chest somewhere that's completely governed by a DAO. And then people can kind of, like vote on how to spend that, what's important to the community, and, like some art assets or whatever else, and take it from there. So there's like, yeah, we do, they're pretty close in many ways too.
Yeah, Whale Shark is kind of doing something like that with his NFT kind of backed currency. And if you have whale tokens, you can kind of vote on what he's doing with them. That still has to be played out. I appreciate your thoughts on that. I think it's a very pragmatic approach. What we're seeing with what you're talking about is essentially you can't just have a decentralized community right to start, right? And we've seen that on the networks, right? Every ICO in 2017 was saying, we're going to create the next decentralized everything. Actually, that's not how things work. Things need to be centralized, at least to start off with. So I definitely appreciate those thoughts. One last technical question, because I know Dimitri would have definitely liked to ask this. So from a business model perspective, are you guys taking like a percentage of these total tokens? What's the business model? Because you guys are spending a certain amount on transactions, at least at this point. Is this something you're going to discontinue once you get to a certain point?
Yeah, so right now our model is like we take a percentage of the total money supply that's issued. So right now we use that for a bunch of different things, everything from market making to bringing other people into your community. So for example, once we have the layer one token, like what you will reach out to your community, right, to distribute layer one tokens. But we also know some people, within our space. So if we were, let's say, like onboarding someone and showing them the role experience, we will send them some layer one tokens and say, hey, check these guys out. So that's like a very good incentive for them to come on layer one. So that's like very synergistic that way. So that's kind of like what we use the 12% for. We're generally like venture funded. So we do have,
gotcha.
Like some funding there that's funding the operations of the company.
When did you guys hold that, get the private investing?
Yeah, so sometime last year is when we announced. So we had some pretty interesting people in the round. So we had traditional venture people like Techstars Ventures, Hustle Fund out in LA. Those people. We are a pretty big investor in the crypto space, which many people know, like Arthur Hayes from BitMEX.
Arthur's involved? Oh, Dimitri's definitely going to miss. Oh, my goodness. He loves Arthur Hayes, man. We saw him in New York City last consensus, I believe in 2019. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah, so he's an investor as well. And then we have some traditional influencers as well. So people like Gary Vaynerchuk jumped in the round as well. So Spencer Dinwiddie, who's very adjacent to the space and done some pretty interesting things in crypto. So yeah, folks like that are in the round.
Yeah, we do a weekly news segment actually on Monday, and Spencer's come up a bunch of times, obviously, with his tokenized contract and kind of the ongoing process, I think is the best way to put it. But what's your experience with Spencer?
Yeah, I mean, he's an investor, so like super bullish on the idea of like what we are doing. Obviously, he's doing it in a different way, kind of a bit more of the cash flow back model, but like he does see like the social play playing out over the years.
Got it. Okay. Well, I guess the last thing I want to do here before we hop out and I get your kind of take on the macro crypto markets as the markets kind of tanked today. But the last thing I wanted to get from you was kind of where you see social currency in 10 years. Like what's like the snow crash version of social currency where we're kind of like 10 years in the future, just everyone's using social currencies in their small little communities. What's kind of your envisioned world where social currencies kind of become popular?
Yeah, so as we said, we see that as a natural transition from like your user-generated content to currency. I think that's a good way to think about it. When you own your own money that's used like within your community, I think that gives you a lot of power and a lot of control over everything that you do. So you can think of like your very, very long tail of social money would be like, hey, do I have a social money for my birthday party? Do I have a social money for my fragrance release? Do I have a social money for a movie that's coming out? And like, there's a universe in which like all of those make sense in a 10-year time frame. So generally speaking, we're very bullish on the long tail ideas that this enables.
So I can gamify people to show up at my birthday party, basically. If I don't have any current friends where I can say, "Hey, come for anything. I'll give you tokens." But anyways, yeah, man, this has been a great conversation about Roll. I don't know if you have anything else before we kind of hop out and I get your general takes. Anything else on Roll that we might have missed?
No, that's about it, man. Like, check us out on like tryroll.com. We're still somewhat of a closed beta. You can always like reach us on Twitter or Discord as well. Like, we're pretty active there. And yeah, like generally always interested in like feedback and getting more people starting to use. And one of the things that's most exciting for us is people whose first crypto is their social money that they ever hold. So even if you're afraid of crypto or new to crypto, you can totally jump in the social money game.
I can't place where I got the quote from, but somebody on Twitter said, and I loved the quote. It was something to the effect of, most people in the future will actually earn their crypto and not buy it. And I do believe, I believe in that sentiment. So, okay. So general crypto talk, obviously we have a ton of different sectors within kind of the growing crypto sphere here. What other sectors, other than NFTs, other than social currencies and DAOs, what other sectors do you see kind of growing within the cryptocurrency sphere here?
Yeah, I think like gaming's pretty interesting as well, kind of the ability to own your own assets. One of the issues with gaming assets though is, it's again like the theoretical model is that, like ultimately you hold the keys to your game assets. So for example, the game developer cannot prevent you from trading. But at the same time, let's say if the game dies, then more or less your asset is worthless as well. So there's like some risk there. So we're like super interested to see kind of like a more common standards or framework coming out, like where assets are more interoperable between games. I think like that's going to be super exciting. And yeah, generally speaking, like we're very excited about product companies in crypto as well, which we think like Roll is one too. I think like there's a lot of like less emphasis on, like let's say like what's the next millions of people going to use crypto, like other than speculation. So that's generally where we like to see like more innovation kind of towards the end user.
Got it. Okay. So we've had a ton of guests on Layer1, and some are within the Ethereum ecosystem, some aren't, and we've had a ton of different networks on that are all attracting attacking smart contracts from a certain type of way, and are trying to attract users and all the things that we kind of talked about here. Are the things that we're talking about, are the applications, are the user base, are the developers, are these going to be something that you think will mostly stay within Ethereum for the next 1 to 2 years? Or do you think that there can be an opportunity for maybe other networks to kind of come up and like maybe start their own community? Because so can we see Roll on Tron? Can we see Roll on EOS? Can we see Roll on, all of these different networks, Tezos, in the future? Or do you see it more of Ethereum centric?
Yeah, that's a great question, honestly. When we talk of social money, we see that as a primitive. Like that primitive can be adopted by any blockchain, right? The reason we chose Ethereum is like it does have a very strong network effects that just help us in a lot of ways. So for example, if we have, like, hey, can you just have like a little bit of liquidity on a trading market, and then all we do is we'll just use Uniswap and throw in some liquidity. And that's the end of the story. Like we don't have to build a Uniswap, which is not what we want to be in. Can you use social money to buy NFT assets? It's like, sure, here's OpenSea. No, we're not building OpenSea. Like we can't build OpenSea, but we can like integrate social money there. So we think like that's generally like very powerful. But that being said, there's nothing stopping Roll from being on Flow in the future, or being on Blockstack or Algorand or whatever other blockchains come up in the future.
Gotcha. That's a perfect answer. And I think we at Layer1 feel the same way. So looking forward to kind of growing out. Hopefully we see Roll kind of interoperable with all these different networks. But this has been a great conversation as expected, Sid. I definitely want to, stay in contact with you. Hopefully we can have you guys back as you grow out Roll and just are doing crazy things within the NFT and social currency sectors, man. We really appreciate all the work you're doing. So let the viewers and listeners out there kind of know where to find you personally as well as Roll.
Yeah, so check us out on tryroll.com. Like I said, we're still in beta, but would love to have people sign up to our mailing list, and we'll get you on the app. On Twitter we are at TryRollHQ, or you can find my personal Twitter. That's SIDKAL. as well. Yeah, we would love to generally hear people's thoughts on social money. And yeah, would love to chat again. Maybe once we have a Layer1 token in a few months, and we can talk about how that's going.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that, and that's something that we're definitely looking forward to. So, last thing I'll leave you with is go blue. I love the University of Michigan. So, you being an alumnus there is awesome, man. So, appreciate this conversation, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Yeah, talk soon, Q.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to check out Layer1 on all the audio and video platforms listed in the description. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next week.